May 1st, John Brown.
In Christ, we find faith to live and even the courage to die. Along the misty moors of Scotland, 3 miles northeast of Muirkirk, stands a solitary pillar surrounded by a rectangle of mossy stone on a lonely tract of pasture known as Priest Hill Farm. Here, on May 1st, 1685, in front of his wife and children, a Scottish officer shot John Brown to death. "What thinkest thou of your husband now, woman?" the executioner asked. She boldly responded, "I thought ever much good of him, and as much now as ever." John Brown was a Scottish Presbyterian, and men like him were called Covenanters. For the Covenanters, God was the only one who had all right, all authority, all power, and all wisdom. That entitled God to be in charge, and God's authority superseded any earthly king, queen, or pope. They signed covenants like sacred contracts and fiercely held on to the beliefs, even when the government demanded they stop preaching, teaching, meeting, or being anything but allied with the Church of England. In 1660, King Charles II reinstituted bishops in the Church of England. Many people cooperated with this reorganization, but the Covenanters refused. To safeguard the truth of the gospel, they held secret services in isolated fields and private homes, but anyone caught attending risked punishment by death. The farmer John Brown was smart and he loved God. He so wanted to be a preacher, but he stammered and found God used him best as a teacher of the young. So he held Bible classes in his barn and welcomed other Covenanters to his home. He had already asked his wife if she was willing to lose him for the cause of Christ. He seemed to know that he would suffer a martyr's death, and she was willing. The pastor who had joined John and Isabel's hands in marriage warned Isabel to save a sheet to wrap John in, as she would not be able to enjoy him for long. Early one morning in 1685, John was outside cutting peat when the muted specter of soldiers broke through the hazy dawn. It was John Graham and his mounted soldiers out hunting Covenanters. They dismounted and forced John back into his farmhouse, and they ransacked it, looking for weapons and treasonable papers. They found what they were looking for and demanded that John take an oath against the Covenanters, against everything he believed. John Brown refused, and he didn't stutter. The soldiers told John to say his last prayer because he was going to immediately die. Brown prayed aloud, and his powerful prayer was interrupted 3 times as John Graham appeared anxious to carry out the execution. On the grassy knoll outside the family home, Graham now held a burnished pistol. He allowed John Brown to kiss his family goodbye. A few tearful words were spoken, and John Brown was ready to surrender his life. Some report the soldiers could not immediately pull the trigger at command, paralyzed by the heart-wrenching scene. So Graham lifted his pistol first and shot John Brown in the head. The Bible tells us in Galatians chapter 2, verse 20, "I have been crucified with Christ, and I myself no longer live, but Christ lives in me. And the real life I now live within this body is a result of my trusting in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me." If you must suffer a great loss to do God's will, are you willing to do it at all costs? In Christ, we find faith to live and even the courage to die.
My name is Ryan. I'm a narrator here at 365 Christian Man. Wow, John Brown's story was a story of conviction and a story of a man who wouldn't give up what he believed, even in the face of death. And I think that for me, this is challenging because we don't have those kind of struggles here in America. We're very blessed to be able to have the freedom to worship who we please. But man, it just challenges me that when the time comes, if the time does come, when we have to stand up for what we believe, even in the face of death, that we would be willing to do so. And maybe not even in that kind of serious of a regard, but even just amongst people we work with or friends who may not believe, but will we have the willingness to stand up and talk about the Lord and what he's done for our lives, no matter what the situation is. So man, I challenge you in your workplace this week, amongst maybe unbelieving family and friends, be willing to share what Christ has done for you.